Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking a really fascinating, high stakes geopolitical puzzle. We're diving deep into the incredibly complex relationship between India and Bangladesh. The goal here is to understand exactly how a sudden, massive political upheaval is clashing head on with decades of deep strategic economic ties. It's basically a classic story of interdependence versus instability, and honestly, the outcome is going to shape the entire future of South Asia. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this relationship, just think about this number for a second. 4,095 kilometers. That is the length of the shared, highly porous border between these two nations. It's actually one of the longest land borders in the entire world, stretching across rivers, dense forests, and heavily populated areas. You simply cannot ignore a neighbor when you're physically connected to them on that kind of scale. So, to make sense of all this, we're breaking this explainer down into 5 clear parts. We'll start with their deeply intertwined history, move into the 2024 political rupture, examine economics, specifically power and projects, then discuss borders and regional security, and finish up by looking at the broader geopolitical stakes. All right, part 1, a deeply intertwined history. Because really, you have to know where these two neighbors started to understand where they are today. Looking back, there's been a really steady trajectory toward what a lot of experts dubbed a golden era of cooperation. Starting from India's decisive military and moral support during the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, we just see this continuous building of trust. By 2011, they're implementing a coordinated border management plan. Fast forward to 2022, they signed 7 major agreements, including a super crucial one on sharing water from the Kushiara River. And then just recently in 2023, they integrated cross-border digital payments using RuPay and UPI to make commerce totally seamless. Honestly, it looked like an unstoppable partnership. But then, almost overnight, the narrative completely flipped. We've literally gone from this golden era of deep connectivity and incredible counterterrorism coordination to a climate that's suddenly defined by stalled projects, massive political uncertainty, and some really intense diplomatic friction. Which brings us to part 2, the 2024 political rupture. Let's look at what actually caused this sudden shift in the bilateral climate. Back in July and August of 2024, a massive student-led uprising totally reshaped the landscape. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, whose Awami League government was closely aligned with India, was ousted, and then she took residence in India. Now, while an interim government stepped in to manage the transition in Dhaka, the immediate fallout was severe. Indian contractors left Bangladesh over safety concerns, which instantly stalled out major projects. And crucially, Sheikh Hasina's continued presence in New Delhi, well, that has become a primary diplomatic flashpoint for the new interim authorities. This political earthquake also exposed some really deep societal fault lines. Reports documented by the Ananta Center highlight a surge in violence, including the targeted killing of at least 11 Hindus during a 35-day period in Bangladesh. This, in turn, sparked major protests over in India. Both nations are now being forced to navigate highly charged domestic narratives, where these isolated incidents can just rapidly escalate into major bilateral friction. The Anana Center actually hits the nail on the head regarding the core dilemma here. They point out that finding a sustainable path forward is going to require both governments to consciously separate all this transient political turbulence from their long-term strategic interests. But as we're about to see, doing that in practice is incredibly difficult. Let's move into part 3, economics, power, and projects. We really need to see how this political tension translates directly into the real economy, especially when we're talking about power grids and multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. First, a little bit of context. Despite all this severe political turbulence, the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics recently reported a massive economic milestone. Bangladesh officially became a $500 billion economy. We're talking a GDP of $501 billion, showing a growth rebound to 4.14%. It is a rapidly expanding economic engine. But, an engine of that size absolutely needs fuel. And right now, India's share of Bangladesh's total power mix has hit a record 15.6%. This is largely driven by India's Adani Power stepping up to fill a really huge gap that was left by Bangladesh's falling domestic gas output and infrastructure limits on imported natural gas. This perfectly captures the interdependence piece of the puzzle. Electricity exports from Adani's Gada plant in India to Bangladesh rose nearly 38% annually in late 2025. Think about that. Even while diplomats were suspending visa services and recalling envoys over political tensions, the actual physical trade of power was expanding out of pure, unavoidable necessity.
On the flip side, though, look at the instability side of the ledger. Huge infrastructure projects funded by Indian lines of credit are currently completely paralyzed. We're looking at the Khulna-Darshana Rail, the Bogarh-Sirajganj Rail, and the Mongla Port upgrade. Combined, we're talking tens of billions of taka in investments. But because of unresponsive lenders, prolonged approvals after the uprising, and Indian workers leaving the country, Bangladesh is now actively having to hunt down alternative international financiers just to keep these critical projects alive.
But economic ties aren't the whole story, right? Let's explore part 4. Borders and regional security. Historically, cooperation here has yielded some huge results. Take, for example, a staggering 71% drop in cross-border cattle smuggling between 2019 and 2021. That didn't happen by accident. It was achieved by India's Border Security Force and the Border Guard Bangladesh actively working together with shared intelligence and technology. And it definitely wasn't just about smuggling. These two nations built a super robust, step-by-step security framework. They established zero-tolerance policies. Bangladesh actually extradited wanted insurgent leaders, which severely weakened groups like Ulfa that were threatening India's northeast. And together, using joint intelligence, they dismantled cross-border terror cells like the JMB. Honestly, it became arguably the single most successful element of their entire bilateral relationship. But as the political winds shift, the narrative is shifting too. Critics and opposition groups in Bangladesh are now leveling a pretty heavy accusation. They're calling it outsourcing sovereignty. Their argument is that this tight security cooperation was way too heavily tied to the Awami League government, effectively compromising Bangladesh's independence. It raises a huge concern that the hard-won security gains of the last decade could just be rapidly reversed by this new political reality. Which brings us to our final section, part 5, the geopolitical stakes. Let's zoom out for a second because the world is absolutely watching this play out. The ripple effects we're talking about, they extend way beyond Dhaka and New Delhi. For India, instability means direct disruption to critical supply chains in its northeastern states. More broadly, if India and Bangladesh distance themselves, it creates a strategic vacuum, and trust me, China is very eager to fill that vacuum to expand its regional influence. Meanwhile, the United States is keeping a really close eye on Bangladesh's democratic governance and human rights, which just adds another whole layer of complexity. And all of this is building toward a highly critical flashpoint, Bangladesh's upcoming general elections scheduled for February. The Impact and Policy Research Institute really poses the ultimate test for these two neighbors. Is counterterrorism a sustainable institutional framework? Or is it actually just a political compact that's super vulnerable to shifts in domestic and geopolitical currents? Put simply, were their ties built on unshakable institutional ground? Or was it all just a fragile political agreement tied to a specific leader ready to snap at the very first shift in domestic politics? So as Bangladesh navigates this incredibly turbulent transition, we want to leave you with this final thought. When the dust finally settles, can the sheer gravity of shared power grids, a 4,000-kilometer border, and deeply intertwined economies actually hold these two nations together through the storm? Or will political instability ultimately tear down decades of strategic progress? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.